Like and subscribe, support me on Patreon for exclusive content. Here's the video. Every great one loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. This bit of text is repeated in 3 places in Bloodborne on quest items, umbilical cords needed to unlock the secret ending of the game. You don't repeat something if it's not important, and this message is central to understanding a major piece of Bloodborne's story. The old gods, the great ones, cannot have children of their own, so they need to claim them from the wombs of humans. It's a horrifying, violating affair that, after my recent playthrough of the game, made me sit back and ask myself a simple question. What does this all mean? I know what Bloodborne is about. I can recount its story to you, I can recount the lore, I can tell you the history of Yharnam and the conflict between the Healing Church and Byrgenwerth and the School of Mensis. I've done the reading. Reading that, I imagine, many of you watching this have also done. And yet, I do not understand what Bloodborne means, what it's actually about. Not its plot or story or lore. I mean, what is Bloodborne trying to tell me with this simple piece of text? Every great one loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. I don't know. And I don't know if I'm ever going to know. I do not understand Bloodborne. Bloodborne is about birth and rebirth. The imagery is not subtle. Birthing imagery and language are used and displayed again and again and again. It feels intentionally difficult to miss. As the Night of the Hunt progresses, we see monsters born and reborn, women giving birth to old gods, great ones wielding placentas as weapons, surrounded by their overwhelming number of newborn children, a blood moon tracked by its cycles, umbilical cords consumed to gain enlightenment, and a woman clad in white, standing resolute and still in the center of a nightmare, bloody and terrified as her newborn, the child of a great one, has been ripped from her womb. There is no question that Bloodborne is transfixed on birth imagery. Bloodborne's story is broken into 2 discrete parts, the context and the text. The game is set in the city of Yharnam, a gothic, rotted town pushed to madness as the result of blood transfusions gone wrong. The School of Byrgenwerth was studying human enlightenment, how humanity could commune with the Great Ones and reach their status as interplanar beings. The head of Byrgenwerth, Master Willem, believed that the path to enlightenment was paved by gaining insight and knowledge, but one of his pupils, Lawrence, believed enlightenment could be reached by injecting the blood of great ones into our bodies. Lawrence left Willem and Byrgenwerth to start the Healing Church, a church that offered the old blood and its healing properties to anyone who welcomed it into their veins. The blood of the Great Ones, however, was not meant for us. It caused people to transform into bloodthirsty beasts, gnarled and perverted. The beast's existence birthed a new job in Yharnam: hunters. On the night of the hunt, when beasts run wild, hunters leave the safety of their homes and cleave their way through matted fur and gnashed teeth. The concepts of insight and enlightenment are repeated throughout much of Bloodborne's lore. That knowledge is the path to understanding the world around us and understanding the unknowable machinations of God, or perhaps the wider pantheon of gods that may live all around us, obscured by a lack of insight. Without enlightenment, humanity is destined to turn into beasts with time and cannibalize itself. There are a lot of ways to interpret the history of Yharnam and its vivid cast of characters, reads of its lore that point us in the direction of understanding the corruption of organized religion, the failure of scholars and philosophers to take action with the knowledge they acquire, and a friend of mine once argued that Bloodborne's premise could be read as an allegory for Ronald Reagan's war on drugs. There's a free video essay idea for anyone with some time on their hands. The history of Yharnam is often what people describe when they try to talk about the game's story, but what I just laid out for you isn't the story of Bloodborne. It's the setting. As you play the game, you do not encounter those moments in nearly any form. Instead, you're late to the party. You see the aftermath of these events, but none of them happen in front of your eyes. Bits of lore told through item descriptions and notes crumpled up in the corner of desolate classrooms, pieced together via wikis and YouTube videos, aren't the story of the game. They're the context. The story is broken up into two discrete parts, the context and the text. The text of Bloodborne, the story that you, the player, experience, follows a hunter who's traveled to Yharnam to participate in the hunt, and as they cut into the belly of beasts, they uncover the places where the Great Ones reside. They witness births and inject blood into themselves and consume umbilical cords and follow a path paved by gods who steal children from the wombs of their mothers. This is the story of Bloodborne, the place where the vast majority of its unrelenting birth imagery resides, not the lore, the context, but the actual text of the game. I understand the context and its many interpretations, but this, the real story of the game, is where I've been left in the dark. There are 4 women in Bloodborne whose stories confound me. Annalise, Yusefka, Ariana, and Sister Adela. The latter 3 you meet relatively early in the game, and when you talk to them, they offer you vials of their blood to use instead of the regular blood vials you have access to. There is a long-running theory that the blood they give you does not come from their veins, but is their menstrual blood. In fact, it seems like all the blood vials in the game are filled, at least partially, with menstrual blood, as the item description for Sister Adela's blood vial reads, "The healing church nuns are chosen for their merit as vessels for blood, and groomed as blood saints. They are the ones who provide the blood for the vials in Yharnam once the old blood runs out." Just because women are involved with a narrative beat about blood does not inherently mean that the story must be about menstruation. However, when tied to the storylines that the women in Bloodborne have, it feels clear to me that there's an intentional link. Pregnancy, menstruation, and birth are all core motifs in Bloodborne, themes explored using the different women in the story. Ariana is a prostitute in Yharnam who seeks refuge from the night of the hunt in Odin's chapel. When you bring her to safety, she says,
"I'd like to tender my thanks, but I haven't much to offer. All I can give is my blood. But would you even take a whore's blood?"
You can take her blood from her, but as the game progresses, she will stop offering you her blood as she seems to be in great pain. Later, when returning to the chapel, Ariana will have left the main room and wandered into the sewers, where she sobs, having given birth to a monstrous infant, the child of a great one, a child she did not wish to have. Ariana's relationship to blood is one of the main pieces of evidence for the menstrual blood theory that people have been sharing since Bloodborne released in 2015. In addition to the bit of lore revealed in the description for Sister Adela's blood about nuns being groomed to become blood saints, Ariana is able to give you her blood until she becomes pregnant, and thus unable to continue providing it. All the while, Sister Adela and Yusefka will keep giving the hunter their blood. Additionally, the old woman who resides in Odin's chapel alongside Ariana and Sister Adela does not provide any blood for consumption, implying that she cannot give blood, as she would be too old to be menstruating anymore. Only women capable of bearing children offer the hunter specific vials of their blood, each one tied to a storyline about pregnancy, birth, and blood. What I find frustrating about Bloodborne is that the groundwork has been laid for its birth themes and menstrual imagery. However, it doesn't seem to say anything specific or nuanced with those themes. I want to be clear when I talk about this frustration. I do believe that Bloodborne says things about motherhood and the roles that women are often forced into in our society, but the game is particularly interested in pregnancy and birth, in addition to motherhood and gender roles. It discusses the latter at length in an interesting way, but doesn't say much of anything about the former. Yusefka is a doctor who runs a clinic in Yharnam. She gives you vials of her blood to use as healing items like Ariana and Adela do, and at some point during the night is transformed into a monster and replaced by an imposter. As the night comes to an end, you find Yusefka on one of her operating tables, bent over in a birthing position. She says,
"God, I'm nauseous. Have you felt this? It's progressing. I can see things. I knew it. I'm different. I'm no beast. Oh, God, it feels awful. But it proves that I'm chosen. Don't you see how they writhe inside my head? It's rather rapturous.
She, like Ariana, is pregnant with the child of a Great One, though Yusefka never gives birth to it. If you kill her, you're rewarded with one of the umbilical cords of the Great Ones, same as if you kill Ariana's newborn, non-human child. Sister Adela is the only character in the game who gives you vials of her blood, but does not end up bearing the child of a Great One. Adela is a blood saint for the Healing Church, meaning she is one of the nuns who provide blood for the vials distributed to the people of Yharnam. If you bring her to safety in Odin's chapel, she'll provide you with vials of her own blood. Adela's story intersects with Ariana's in that if you've accepted and taken blood from Ariana when talking to Adela in the chapel, the sister will eventually kill Ariana. Many people think that Adela kills Ariana out of jealousy, given the way that she responds to the player if they refuse her blood while having taken Ariana's, and the way that Adela is constantly looking over at Ariana when the player talks with her. But the murder seems to be born of mixed motives. While yes, Adela seems to imply that she's hurt by the hunter if they turn her down, the Healing Church's doctrines state that the blood transfusions done without church permission are sacrilegious and considered criminal. Adela notices the crime and kills the person she believes she can overpower. Additionally, Ariana is implied to be of a righteous bloodline who opposes the church's rule. The final woman who interacts with the pregnancy theme in Bloodborne doesn't give you any vials of her blood. She's far too righteous for that. Instead, Annalise, Queen of the Vile Bloods, asks you to bring her blood. She asks for the hunter to deliver her blood dregs, the blood of hunters who abuse blood vials administered by the Healing Church. Their in-game item picture resembles sperm cells, which is fitting since Queen Annalise partakes in these blood dreg offerings so that she may one day bear the child of blood, the next vile blood heir. Giving Annalise blood dregs doesn't result in her bearing a child, at least not one we ever see, but I'm not quite sure what to make of her wanting pregnancy. I'm not sure what to make of Ariana's forced pregnancy, or Yusefka's forced pregnancy, or the game's fixation on blood and birth, menstruation, and pregnancy. I can analyze each of these story beats individually, but they never come together to mean anything of note that has anything to do with any of the other birth theming that Bloodborne presents. Ariana's pregnancy is horrifying and cruel. She sobs and calls her newborn child a nightmare before dying alongside it, a violation caused by an old god not concerned with the human toll its child takes. Is this meant to express the violence that sex workers experience at the hands of unsympathetic men who often abuse them? It could be broader than that and express the way that many women are simply used for their bodies and abandoned by the men who get them pregnant. It could also explore the way that bodily autonomy is often taken away from women, who are left to suffer by the cold, unfeeling hands of powerful men. Ariana's story doesn't have to end with childbirth, however. What does her murder at the hands of Sister Adela tell us? Is that meant to shine a light on the shame that institutions and churches place on women's bodies when they're used outside of the confines of marriage? The violence that shameful rhetoric can incite? Of Sister Adela, she seems insecure and distressed. Is her paranoia, violence, and insecurity born of being abused by a church system that, by Bloodborne's own wording, grooms nuns into becoming blood saints? A system that drives her to kill an innocent woman? What does Yusefka's story tell us? She's replaced by an imposter who yearns to bear the child of the Great Ones, and when she finally gets it, she bears nothing but excruciating pain and glimpses of enlightenment, her body twitching erratically. Is this meant to be interpreted as a person's faith being rewarded, but that rewards from gods seldom manifest in ways that humans can appreciate? What does Yusefka's double identity tell us when tied to her pregnancy? I'm not even sure what that's supposed to mean. It's baffling to the point where I don't even really know where to start with it. Queen Annalise also yearns to bear a child, but not out of wanting to be a mother. Instead, she aims to extend her bloodline, not through the marriage of a consort. No, she turns down the player if they make such a proposal. She wants an heir to be born of the blood of the hunters who slaughtered her people. Is this meant to be a commentary on how royalty and rulership seek to extend their reign at all costs, no matter how bitter and feeble their reign eventually becomes? It could be, but what do all of those things add up to mean? My individual interpretation of these events might have some legs, and bits of them have been written about as evidence for different interpretations of Bloodborne, but they're not saying anything nuanced or exploring the topic of pregnancy or childbirth with any depth, since all of their arguments exist largely in isolation. They aren't a conversation being argued with multiple examples, they're just single, unrelated lessons. They all connect, however, they're linked in their subject matter, which makes me believe they should say something about pregnancy or birth. But they don't. These stories use pregnancy as a narrative element to talk about other things. Many of those themes relate to the suffrage of women, but are largely not about pregnancy, despite how often it's used both narratively and visually. Each woman seems to have a foil, an example that acts counter to her situation, something that should illustrate Bloodborne's point about the theme. Ariana does not want to bear the offspring of a Great One, but is impregnated anyway, while Yusefka's imposter, welcomes a Great One into her womb. I don't know how else these stories contrast, however, other than the consent of the pregnancy. Ariana suffers a lonely, cold death in the sewers, sitting next to her newborn who she curses. Yusefka is thankful for her gift from the gods, but suffers the same as Ariana. That's actually not entirely true either. If the player consumes 4 vials of Ariana's blood before she gives birth, she says,
"I've never been happier,"
while in the sewers with her child. So what do these examples say about each other? What do they say about Bloodborne's pregnancy theme? How does consuming Ariana's blood relate to her feelings about having a child? Annalise is a noble interested in continuing her family line after the vile bloods have been wiped out by the Healing Church's hunters. She's willing to kill, or rather have someone else kill, in order to continue her bloodline. Sister Adela is a part of the institution that slaughtered Annalise's kingdom, and she too is willing to kill to continue the church's reign. Adela is a nun and is celibate, but aims to continue the reign of her faith, while Annalise is looking to secure her family's line. They are opposites of one another, but neither tells us anything about the other. Neither tells me anything about the birth metaphor. The 4 characters closest to childbirth in Bloodborne, a game full of birth imagery, subtext, and, well, text, say nothing about it. There is one final mother I want to talk about, Queen Yharnam, the Pthumerian woman whom the city of Yharnam claims its namesake. We see her 3 times in the game. The first is in Byrgenwerth after the player kills Rom, the vacuous spider. We see a quick scene that shows the lifting of the veil that obscures the Great Ones and displays the true nature of Yharnam as the blood moon begins to shine in all of its glory. The hunter sees Yharnam crying, looking up at the moon as an infant also cries in the distance, before the scene abruptly ends. We see Yharnam again at the top of the tower in the Nightmare of Mensis, itself an allusion to the pregnancy theme, as Mensis is almost spelled exactly like mensis, the Latin word for menstruation. Here, we find Yharnam at the top of Murgo's loft, looking up at where her child is being held. Her hands are bound, and her brilliant white dress is stained dark red, blood pouring from her abdomen. There is no visual language here to tell us or even begin to imply that her pregnancy and the birth of her child happened in any consensual fashion. Every Great One loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. Yharnam is the surrogate. The 3rd time we see Yharnam is in an optional boss fight that takes place deep in the catacombs of the city inside the Chalice dungeons, where a precursor race of humans lived, the place where Lawrence and other Byrgenwerth scholars initially discovered the old blood. Yharnam was the queen of these people, the Pthumerians, but when we find her, she is still carrying her infant in utero. All of these encounters with her are non-literal events, a representation of something. I appreciate what the Bloodborne wiki has to say about the fight you have with her in the dungeons. During this Chalice dungeon fight, she is still pregnant with Murgo. It is unknown the implication of this. This line highlights the problem I have with Bloodborne's thematic writing. It is unknown the implication of this. I understand the story of why Yharnam gave birth to the Great One Oedon's child. After all, they must find surrogates for their children. However, I don't know what Bloodborne is trying to tell me with this story. I don't know what Bloodborne is trying to tell me with any of its pregnancy stories. What is From Software trying to say about pregnancy and birth through the stories of Ariana and Yasefka and Sister Adela and Annalise and Queen Yharnam and the Hunter, who is reborn as a Great One if you manage to kill the Moon Presence? There is no through line here, no conversation, no dialogue about the events of the game and the history of its setting and the way that Bloodborne leans on menstruation and birthing imagery again and again and again. What is Bloodborne trying to say with a boss literally titled The One Reborn? In the cutscene that introduces the boss, we see it born out of darkness, slipping out of the shadow of the moon like a childbirth. But what does that say? There is hardly any context for its existence. It slides out of the shadow in an instant, is defeated, and then disappears forever, never mentioned again in the text or the context. Every bit of information about The One Reborn is based entirely on fan theories that, frankly, have very little to go on. These elements are all tied together with the same thread, so you'd think that one would say something about the other, that the One Reborn is in conversation with Queen Yharnam or Ariana, the two women who've actually given birth. But there's nothing to the birth imagery to dissect or understand. There's nothing substantial being implied. You'd think that the umbilical cords you need to consume to experience the final encounter in the game would potentially tie to any of its mothers in some substantial way, but there's nothing. There's a comparison that could be made between the Great Ones who need surrogates to have their children and Annalise, a woman who asks you to help her with artificial insemination. But there's nothing connecting those two outside of a surface-level tether that points to the idea of non-traditional reproduction. From Software has a habit of making its games narratively vague. They rely heavily on the context to tell their stories, with lore written about great kingdoms and their failures, about rot and decay. They often help inform the game's story. I've leaned heavily on the context provided by lore to make leaps in my logic for my own understanding of Bloodborne and the rest of the studio's games. My problem with Bloodborne isn't that I don't understand its story or that I'm missing context for why its events happen. My problem is that I don't think Bloodborne is saying anything with one of its central themes. That's not to say that Bloodborne says nothing at all. It has a lot to say about organized religion and the exploitation of vulnerable populations. Remember, I'm still waiting for that Ronald Reagan Bloodborne video essay. And as I've mentioned before, it even says interesting things about its women characters through their roles in the story. There's a great video about that topic specifically by Cupcake Souls that I'd recommend. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Honeybet's video about how the game portrays femininity, which both do some killer analysis. The game says a lot about its women, which you can watch videos on or read more about in the articles I've linked in the description. It's not that Bloodborne says nothing. FromSoft has a lot to say with the game and the rest of its catalog, which is why I find it dropping the ball so hard with its central birth imagery so frustrating. I've seen people discuss the game online and say that it's about pregnancy and menstruation, but I simply don't think that's true. Those things are in Bloodborne. I mean, what kind of blood do you think the blood in Bloodborne could possibly be? Don't get me wrong, the game calls on birth imagery left and right, but it's not about birth or pregnancy or anything else like that. It employs that imagery, but all it seems to say across all of its uses is, isn't this pretty fucked up? When you think about it, isn't reproduction kind of weird and gross? It's shallow. Bloodborne seems to be obsessed with the aesthetic qualities of childbirth and the body horror that is often associated with it, but it doesn't know what to say about it, so it opts to just point a finger and tell you to fill in the blanks. Well, I can't. Trust me, I've tried. Like and subscribe. I've got your back.